This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome, international friends, to another episode of Atomic Biscuits. This is 2025-0216, Psychopump. We'll start out at not exactly a conservative outlet, theguardian.com. Rogue states could use AI to do real harm, warns ex-Google CEO. Eric Schmidt fears terrorist groups or countries such as North Korea, Iran, or Russia may use AI to develop weapons. Now, if you follow this guy at all, if you just Google him, you'll find that he is making comments and he's getting picked up at least weekly. But periodically, he has been aligned with China. He has worked on Project Dragonfly. He has been around a very long time. I would say since the dawn of the modern internet, he has been at the very core. And we can find him in places that have some dark corners. So I would encourage you to do a little dig on our friend Eric Schmidt and where he's been. Has he been to North Korea? Google's former chief executive has warned that artificial intelligence could be used by rogue states such as North Korea, Iran, and Russia to harm innocent people. Eric Schmidt, who held senior posts at Google from 2001 to 2017, told BBC Radio 4's Today program that those countries and terrorists could adopt and misuse the technology to develop weapons to create a bad biological attack from some evil person. The tech billionaire said, "The real fears that I have are not the ones that most people talk about AI. I talk about extreme risk. Think about North Korea or Iran or even Russia, who have some evil goal. This technology is fast enough for them to adopt that they could misuse it and do real harm." In reference to the head of the Al-Qaeda terrorist group who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks in 2001, he said, "I'm always worried about the Osama bin Laden scenario, where you have some truly evil person who takes over some aspect of our modern life and uses it to harm people." Schmidt agreed with the U.S. export controls introduced by the former U.S. President Joe Biden, which restricted the sale of microchips that power the most advanced AI system to 18 countries to slow adversaries' progress on AI research. He urged government oversight on private tech companies that are developing AI models, but added that overregulation could stifle innovation. "It's really important that governments understand what we're doing and keep their eye on us," he said. "My experience with the tech leaders is that they do have an understanding of the impact they're having, but they might make a different values judgment than the government would make." Schmidt was speaking from Paris, where the two-day AI Action Summit finished on Tuesday, with the U.S. and UK refusing to sign an agreement on inclusive AI. The declaration was signed by 57 countries, including India and China, the EU, and the African Union. The UK declined to back the joint communiqué because it failed to provide enough practical clarity or address harder questions about national safety. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has said that the regulation would kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off. Schmidt said Europe's more restrictive approach meant that the AI revolution, which is the most important revolution in my opinion since electricity, is not going to be invented in Europe. Separately, Schmidt, who was head of Google when the company bought Android, which now makes the most used mobile phone operating system in the world, said he supported initiatives to keep phones out of schools. "The situation with children is particularly disturbing to me," he said. "I think smartphones with a kid can be safe. They just need to be moderated. We can all agree that children should be protected from the bad of the online world." Schmidt has also supported proposals for a ban on social media for children under 16. He said, "Why should we run such a large, uncontrolled experiment on the most important people in the world, which is the next generation?" Anyway, that's over at The Guardian. Of course, left-leaning mag. But the thing is, there's some interesting data points here. One of the things that got my attention when I heard this first float out of BBC this week was this idea that he posited about a rogue creating some sort of dangerous situation. This in reference to the head of the Al Qaeda terrorist group who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. I'm always worried about the Osama bin Laden scenario, that thing. The thing is, who's to say it hasn't already happened? We've already experienced a worldwide pandemic. We know it came from a lab leak in China. We know that the biological experiments that were going on were funded in part, at least in part, by United States dollars. Now, we know where DeepSeek came from, so maybe this is not a causative tale of worry, but simply him explaining what has already occurred. Anyway, it's worth thinking about. I encourage you to dig a little bit on North Korea and Eric Schmidt and decide for yourself. All right, let's have a look over at dailycaller.com this week. They had Trump gives RFK new assignment leading Maha Commission hours after Senate confirmation. I got to tell you, one of the most entertaining parts of my day is listening to BBC report on what Trump did today. They try to tell it with a straight face, and it's kind of difficult. It's some real comedy there. The article continues. The Trump administration is kicking off the Department of Health and Human Services, that's the HHS, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. era, with a massive new health commission, according to a Thursday evening White House press release. Just hours after the Senate confirmed Kennedy Jr. as the next HHS secretary, the White House announced the Make America Healthy Again Commission. The commission is a sprawling new initiative which will, among other things, address America's chronic disease epidemic and ending childhood chronic illness. American life expectancy significantly lags behind other developed countries, with pre-COVID-19 United States life expectancy averaging 78.8 years and comparable countries averaging 82.6 years. This equates to 1.25 billion fewer life years for the United States population, the press release read. The release also noted that 6 out of 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease and 4 out of 10 have at least 2. The announcement emphasized making a shift in the way Americans view their health. This includes fresh thinking on nutrition, physical activity, healthy lifestyles, over-reliance on medication and treatments, the effects of new technological habits, environmental impacts, and food and drug quality and safety, the release read. The sprawling commission will be chaired by Kennedy Jr. as the HHS secretary and co-chaired by the assistant to the president for domestic policy. Other members of the commission will include the education secretary, the agriculture secretary, the FDA commissioner, and at least 10 other cabinet members and senior officials. The initial mission of the commission, according to the readout, will be to study and combat childhood disease. Within 100 days, the commission will present to Trump a report on best practices for preventing childhood health issues. The sweeping commission follows a turbulent Senate confirmation process for Kennedy Jr., who Trump awarded the HHS nomination to after Kennedy dropped his upstart independent presidential bid to back Trump. The language of the press release was rife with many of Kennedy's key campaign catchphrases and platforms. That's over at thedailycaller.com. I think he's going to ruffle a lot of feathers with his non-standard approach to how to stay healthy. The man clearly has mastered it on his own. I think that we could learn a lot from someone who is more focused on how to do it a natural way. I think one of the more fun things that's going to happen over this administration is being able to look at those who are not from the most conservative side of the bench and then have them pushed to the fore where we can decide whether we like or don't like bits and pieces of what they have to say. At least it's different. And so, well, like with Kennedy, we have Elon Musk. No, we're not going to like everything they do, but it's going to illustrate and launch to the front things that never would in the past. And then it's kind of like that coin flip that makes you decide, do I really want to do this or do I don't? We may decide we don't want that anymore, or that we need to curb that, or that's a little out of control. And I know there's some states who are trying to get Elon Musk's new Doge under control by calling it unconstitutional. We'll see. And with those same out of control powers that the Democrats use to drive things all over the map, we're going to see some sort of reflection of that now that someone else is in control. Will they help curb things, or will they just point? We'll see. Doge website launches to be maximally transparent with taxpayers. This comes to us from Breitbart.com's politics section. The Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, has launched its official website in an effort to be maximally transparent, sharing its most recent findings of bureaucratic waste in a live feed. Almost immediately after left-wing tech publication Gizmodo published a piece Wednesday claiming that the billionaire Tesla CEO is a fountain of lies because the Doge.gov landing page was empty despite a constant stream of updates coming from the Doge X account. The website went live with a breakdown of federal employees and regulations. The homepage takes users to a live feed of the X account's detailed posts on savings, while the Unconstitutionality Index page shows that the number of agency rules created by unelected bureaucrats for each law passed by Congress in 2024 was 18.5. It also broke down federal regulations by agency, with the Department of Agriculture coming out on top with more than 21,000 sections of regulations, followed closely by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, with more than 20,200. A webpage for the savings found by the department states that the receipts will be posted no later than Valentine's Day, that's February 14th here in the States, which is on a Friday. In fact, we post our actions on the Doge handle on X and to the Doge website. Doge's leader Elon Musk said during a press conference from the Oval Office on Tuesday. So all our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization. The new website also includes the link for software engineers and other technology professionals to apply to work at the department, stating that the department needs world-class talent to work long hours identifying and eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. That's over. Oh, goodness me. That's over at Breitbart.com. So you dropped your iPhone, into your cup of coffee, and now you need a new one. Oh no, you can't get TikTok back. Well, relax. TikTok is back in the App Store. The story is over at TheVerge.com. Nearly a month after it was banned in the U.S., TikTok has returned to the App Store for iPhones and other Apple devices, as well as the Google Play Store for Android phones and tablets. The return follows U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi sending a letter to Apple assuring that it won't be fined for hosting the app, according to Bloomberg, which first reported that the app would return. Apple and Google removed TikTok from their app stores in January to comply with a law banning apps from TikTok owner ByteDance. Although President Donald Trump signed an executive order on January 20th that directed the Department of Justice not to enforce the ban for 75 days. Apple and Google have until now refused to host it in their stores due to the risk of billions of dollars in penalties for doing so. Apple and Google didn't respond to The Verge's request for comment about receiving the letter from Bondi. Spokespeople for TikTok and the Department of Justice also didn't respond to requests for comment. J.D. Vance, the vice president, has reportedly been tasked by Trump to oversee negotiations for a potential sale of TikTok. There's a lot in there. There's a tiny article about, it's back. We know that it was part of a spidery web of deceit crawling across the interwebs. It looks like candy, but what's inside that candy-coated shell, right? What is in the network? What is it collecting? Who is it collecting it from? Their location data, other information off their phone. Just how insidious is it, and how might it talk back to Central Command, and who's at Central Command? And along with that, what happened to Huawei and all of that infected equipment and those drones that were manufactured in China and those Apple servers that were in data centers with mysterious chips on them? None of these things have quite seen the end of their story. So there's more to come, I think, as we count down the seconds. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Over at redstate.com, they're asking, is something in the water? Feminist House Democrat goes off rails during House manufacturing hearing. This sister told you from February 13th. While Democrats are notorious for making some pretty head-scratching statements, the troubling state of their combined Trump-Musk derangement syndrome in recent weeks has elevated their bizarreness to a whole new level of fail. For instance, we had the other Mad Maxine, freshman Representative Maxine Dexter, Democrank from Oregon, declare rather awkwardly this week during an anti-Musk American Federation of Government Employees rally that we have to fuck Trump. The original Mad Maxine, Representative Maxine Waters, Democrank from California, has also gone full code red, yelling expletives at Musk and screaming at those keeping fanatical Democrat members of Congress from storming the Department of Education. Then there was Senator Minority Leader Chucky Schumer, Democrat from New York, who took to gesturing wildly while repeatedly shouting, "We will win," alongside Waters outside of the Treasury Department. Then there was Representative Jan Schakowsky, Democrat from Illinois, who insulted the intelligence of women everywhere with a statement she made during a House Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee hearing Wednesday on AI in manufacturing. While questioning one of the witnesses, the 80-year-old Schakowsky wondered why it was so hard, in her view, to have more female representation in the manufacturing industry. Before she turned it over to the witness to respond, the Congresswoman speculated on the possible reasons why. Yesterday, I met with a manufacturing company, but they are also engaged in getting young people more engaged in manufacturing. So I asked them, so how many of those students that are signing up and want to do this, how many are women? And they said, well, I know there's at least 13% or something. It was a low number. And you had mentioned trying to engage more women in manufacturing. I'm just wondering if just the name manufacturing sounds like a guy. Needless to say, some of her fellow committee members on the Republican side were not amused. Even other progressive Democrats were openly cringing, like Young Turks founder/host Cenk Uygur. If a Democratic leader proposes to use the word womanufacturing, we'll lose every election for the rest of my life, he opined on the Twitter X machine. Conservative radio talk show host Eric Erickson, anti-Trumper, quipped, "Think of all the women who will never get a manicure because it sounds like a guy. And damn, maybe we need to change gynecologist to something else. And menstrual cycle must be changed, as should manhole cover, etc." Under this mindset, the list is endless and asinine. It reminds me of the black hole controversy. It's racist. It's racist. All kidding aside, statements like Schakowsky's about the word manufacturing allegedly being triggering enough to keep women away from that particular workforce is just 50 shades of stupid, because they infantilize women and set them back decades by giving off the impression that they're too sensitive, too snowflakey to compete in a male-dominated industry. Women who are tough enough to learn a specific manufacturing trade and pursue careers in it are not buttercup, words, or violence types, Mrs. Schakowsky. Further, I wonder if the Schakowskys of America have ever thought about the possibility that maybe there aren't a lot of women in manufacturing simply because a majority of women have found other fields with far more flexible schedules, more their cups of tea. Maybe it just simply boils down to that in most instances and nothing more. But as usual with Democrats, when all else fails, blame men. Wash, rinse, repeat. It never ends. I wish it would stop, but here we are. Again, that's over at redstate.com. Well, having recently become a resident of the free state of Florida, this affects me near and dear. This one comes to us from thegatewaypundit.com. Mexico threatens to sue Google over Gulf of America name change. This is by Ben Q. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum is not happy with Google. At Thursday morning's press conference, Sheinbaum expressed her displeasure at the company's decision to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. She has even threatened to take legal action. According to Sheinbaum, Trump's executive order renaming the Gulf only applied to the continental shelf belonging to the United States. "We do have a dispute with Google at the moment," she said, "and if necessary, we will file a civil suit. What we're saying to Google is check the order that was issued by the White House and signed by President Trump," she continued. "You will see that it does not refer to the entire Gulf, but to the continental shelf." Sheinbaum added that she had sent a letter to Google protesting the name change, but received a negative response. "If they continue to insist, we will too," she added. "We're even thinking of a lawsuit because they are even naming Mexican territory, which is our continental shelf." Both Google and Apple have adhered to the name change on their map applications, which are the most popular worldwide. People using maps in the U.S. will see Gulf of America, and people in Mexico will see Gulf of Mexico, Google said in a statement last month. Everyone else will see both names. In his executive order entitled Restoring Names That Honor American Greatness, Trump said that the Gulf of Mexico remains an indelible part of America and that its name should reflect this fact. The order stated, "The area formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico has long been an integral asset to our once burgeoning nation and has remained an indelible part of America. The Gulf was a crucial artery for America's early trade and global commerce. It is the largest gulf in the world, and the United States coastline along this remarkable body of water spans over 1,700 miles and contains nearly 160 million acres. The Gulf will continue to play a pivotal role in shaping America's future and the global economy. In recognition of this flourishing economic resource and its critical importance to our nation's economy and its people, I am directing that it officially be renamed the Gulf of America." Trump has also renamed the Denali Mountain in Alaska to Mount McKinley like it was before. The 25th president of the United States and his favorite past president, undoing Obama's Denali naming of the mountain. Anyway, Still think it's weird that Mexico has a president whose last name is Scheinbaum. And I think it's funny that we're going to be able to go to the coastline to see the Gulf of America for at least a little while. That's over at thegatewaypundit.com. Over at amgreatness.com, American Greatness. The deep state dies in daylight. The public role in ending systemic government abuses. Trump is urged to establish a presidential commission to investigate government abuse, ensuring transparency and accountability in federal agencies. This by Thaddeus McCotter. In a January 30th appearance with Elizabeth McDonald on Fox Business's The Evening Edit, American Majority CEO Ned Runn, author of the best-selling American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism, advanced a singular proposition for President Trump to utilize an often neglected tool in the executive branch's workshop for dismantling the deep state, presidential commissions. Succinctly, the chief executive establishes presidential commissions to address an issue and report directly back to them for prospective further action. The president determines the commission's scope, appoints its leadership and membership, establishes its charge, functions, and powers, its funding and other administrative support from the executive branch, and sets a deadline for its termination. You can see Mr. Biden's presidential commission on expanding, i.e. packing, the Supreme Court. For Mr. Runn, there needs to be a presidential commission composed wholly of members of the public to investigate abuses of power and all instances of the weaponization of government by those who were, and perhaps still are, entrusted with police and surveillance powers of the state. I think it's time for President Trump to appoint a special presidential commission in which he appoints all the members of that commission, gives them full investigative and subpoena powers, and has that commission report directly to him. And then when Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and John Ratcliffe are confirmed, have all of them come before the commission, have those hearings be public. Mr. Runn then went further, explaining what should be done with the Presidential Commission's findings. The Presidential Commission should do a final report with recommendations, including stripping even more people of security clearances, prosecutions, proposing legislative reforms from Congress. It's time to pull back and have radical transparency and accountability for these institutions that have been massively abused over the last 9 years. Some may argue that the Presidential Commission is merely repeating much of the oversight work performed by Congress over the last few years. This overlooks two important factors. First, the Biden administration was, shall we say, less than cooperative and forthcoming in responding to congressional oversight requests, especially from the Republican-led House. There is likely a lot left on and, more importantly, under the table for a public commission to unearth and investigate, given the diminished, though still extant, bipartisan opposition to reforming the administrative state. President Trump is best served by establishing his commission rather than wholly relying upon Congress to do it. Secondly, as Mr. Runn stresses, these abuses of power were falsely deemed justified as being done in the defense of the very public whose trust they violated. If President Trump were to do this, he should announce, "I'm doing this for the American people. This abuse has been done in the name of the American people. They have funded it, and the American people deserve to know the whole truth about what's happened the last 9 years with the FBI, the DOJ, and our intel community." I could not agree more. As I responded to Mr. Runn at the time, "Great idea, Ned Runn, for a presidential commission composed of the public, for the public, to protect the public from government abusing its powers." Mr. Runn is correct, and this renders it critically important that his proposal not be incorrectly perceived. This or any other prospective presidential commission would be designed by Mr. Trump to facilitate reforming and deciding the future and fate of the components of the executive branch. Thus, such a presidential commission could operate contemporaneously to provide suggestions for current and future reforms to President Trump, or could serve as a post-mortem inquest, providing to him ameliorative measures for the damage the rogue agency and individuals caused, and the prophylactic policies to ensure such abuses of power never again occur. Above all, as his final term progresses, by keeping the administrative state's abuses front and center in the citizenry's mind, any of Mr. Trump's prospective presidential commissions will maximize the first and best guard against the resurrection of the rogue administrative state: public awareness and transparency. The deep state thrives in darkness. The deep state dies in daylight. Consequently, if President Trump implements Mr. Runn's sound proposal, I would humbly offer a further suggestion. Next up, a publicly comprised, likely post-mortem presidential commission on the waste, fraud, abuse, and weaponization of USAID. Talk about lit. Anyway, that's over at amgreatness.com. Well, speaking of waste, fraud, and abuse, fraudster, current convict Elizabeth Holmes tells magazine she's misunderstood. This is by Jim Thompson over at redstate.com. Dead eyes. The stare of a psychotic. Meeting with Elizabeth Holmes was apparently a frightening event. She'd wear all black turtlenecks, carefully planned to emote a Steve Jobs feel. Her makeup was simple: femme fatale red lipstick and simple eyeliner. Holmes lowered her voice a few octaves to sound more authoritative, but it was the stare that unnerved people. She would never blink, eyes burrowing through people. Holmes was playing a part. And like an actor in a play, it was all fiction, an act to fool an audience. Holmes started a $9 billion market cap bust called Theranos. She claimed that her medical device could diagnose multiple conditions with a single drop of blood, conditions that previously would take several vials of blood. She told Fortune magazine a series of bald-faced lies, and Theranos came crashing down after a Wall Street Journal expose got the attention of the feds. The collapse of Theranos was inevitable. It was a house of cards. Theranos' blood testing machine called Edison was no more scientifically valid than Scientology's e-meter. 10 years ago, Vice President Joe Biden toured Theranos' Potemkin campus to get a look at Holmes' miracle machine. Holmes was a high-end Democrat donor, so the vice president, taking time to meet Holmes with her prop-up fraud, seemed like a natural fit. Biden toured the fake lab and saw the fake Edison machine, and he liked what he saw. This is inspiration. It is amazing to me, Elizabeth, what you've been able to do. What's most impressive to me is that you're not only making these lab tests more accessible, empowering people whether they live in the barrio or a mansion, putting them in a position to help take control of their own health. Phony. She was forced to tell the truth when she was deposed by the SEC. The federal prosecutor called her fraud on the scale of Bernie Madoff. Holmes' Icarus-like plunge was predictable. She managed to manipulate herself into vast wealth, but reality brought her crashing back down. She fell to earth and into prison, but not before she and her legal team used every method of manipulation to keep her from serving a lengthy prison sentence. Holmes played the "I was raped" card twice. She claimed she dropped out of Stanford because she was raped. She claimed she was sexually abused by her co-defendant, Sonny Bolani. Between her arrest and incarceration, Holmes got pregnant. Twice. She claims that she never thought she would be convicted, so having children was just part of life. Or maybe her pregnancies were more like cards to play in her game of manipulation, another form of sympathy manipulation, like her claim of being a rape victim. Maybe being pregnant would gain her sympathy and an acquittal. Her children were pawns to play. It didn't work. Holmes was convicted and sentenced to federal prison and ordered to pay over $500 million in restitution. Holmes will never pay the fine. She will pay in time served. Her sentence of 11.25 years was reduced to 9 years for good behavior. Apparently, her manipulation worked to a small degree. Holmes is 2 years into her sentence. She'll see freedom in 2032. But ever the manipulator, Holmes delayed her incarceration by a few minutes. Why? She reported to prison but was pumping breast milk for her daughter named Invictus. The prison had to wait for Holmes to pump. She and her legal team filed a motion requesting that she be allowed to stay out of prison while her case was on appeal because she had young children, stating, "Ms. Holmes has deep ties to the community. She is the mother of 2 very young children. She has close relationships with family and friends, many of who submitted letters at sentencing vouching for her good character, and she volunteers with a rape crisis and counseling organization." People magazine interviewed Holmes in prison and published a gushing piece on Wednesday. The Hollywood Reporter wrote about Holmes as well. People Mag and the Hollywood Reporter do a little paste blame on Holmes. Instead, they sugary passage quote like this. While in prison, Holmes detailed her usual routine, which includes working out, working as a reentry clerk, attending therapy, counseling inmates who were rape survivors, teaching French classes, and reading. Given she was still breastfeeding for her baby when starting her prison sentence, Holmes said she spoke to the prison's warden about allowing incarcerated women to breastfeed privately. Authorities eventually built multiple lactation rooms in the housing units. According to People magazine, Holmes is now a champion of civil rights. Holmes was motivated to draft an American Freedom Act bill, which People described as one aimed to bolster the presumption of innocence and change criminal procedure, which she described as her life's work. In lieu of reading gushy glam pieces casting a convicted criminal as a victim, read the book Bad Blood. Holmes is a criminal, a manipulative convict who blames everyone but herself. She blames the criminal justice system. According to Holmes, her life in prison is hell. Gone are the Steve Jobs turtlenecks, the eyeliner, and the ruby red lipstick. What remains is a manipulating criminal, but she kept her eyes, unblinking eyes, doll's eyes, dead eyes. Dead eyes. Over at redstate.com, this one came from Jim Thompson. Goodness gracious. After EU apoplexy, Zelensky now changes tone and says Ukraine must be involved in peace plan. This is by Sundance over at theconservativetreehouse.com. If you read the Zelensky statement yesterday, I mean, this was, let's see, when was this? February 13th? The 13th, so that would have been the 12th. Following the phone call with President Trump, you would notice the seemingly detached nature of his comments, almost as if Zelensky was a bystander awaiting further instructions. Apparently, the European Union, various NATO members, and likely some DOS, CIA operatives bent his ear 24 hours later. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky now says that it's critical for Ukraine to participate in any discussion on the future of Ukraine. In his first comments to journalists since Trump held individual calls first with Putin and then Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader conceded that it was not very pleasant that the American president spoke first to Putin, but he said the main issue was to not allow everything to go according to Putin's plan. "We cannot accept it as an independent country, any agreements made without us," Zelensky said as he visited a nuclear power plant in western Ukraine. During the conversation with Trump on Wednesday, Zelensky said the U.S. president told him he wanted to speak to both the Russian and Ukrainian leaders at the same time. He never mentioned in a conversation that Putin and Russia was a priority. "We today trust these words. For us, it is very important to preserve the support of the United States of America," Zelensky said. NATO, the UK, and the European Commission are not happy that President Trump and the Russian President Putin may end up framing the terms of a peace deal that ends the war in Ukraine. The EU, the UK, BlackRock, and JP Morgan are expecting financial gains. President Trump dismissing their claims and efforts while simultaneously demanding surety for any further U.S. funding has left the EU very angry. Ukraine, Europe, and the United States should work together on this. Together, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk wrote Wednesday on social media. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas said, "It is clear that any deal behind our backs will not work. You need the Europeans. You need the Ukrainians." Others balked at Trump's overtures and poured cold water on his upbeat outlook. Just as Putin has no intention of stopping hostilities even during potential talks, we must maintain Western unity and increase support to Ukraine and political and economic pressure on Russia, Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Chashna said. Our actions must show that we are not changing course. The non-pretending reality is that the United States was in a proxy war against Russia, with the EU and NATO towing the line as participants, essentially a Western alliance with the Biden administration controlling everything. The U.S. State Department, USAID, and the CIA were organizing all of the efforts inside Ukraine. Zelensky was following the orders and instructions of others. Suddenly, President Trump begins extracting the U.S. from the proxy war. Without the U.S. remaining involved, Ukraine has nothing. The EU and NATO group understand this, and yet they must pretend a proxy war with their participation was not the reality. In a related action, President Trump signed an executive order outlining that anyone from the State Department or CIA who attempts to retain their involvement in Ukraine and subsequently defies the expressed change in approach by President Trump will be removed from their position. Quote, all officers or employees charged with implementing the foreign policy of the United States must, under Article 2, do so under the direction and authority of the President. Failure to faithfully implement the President's policy is grounds for professional discipline, including separation. The personnel procedures of executive departments and agencies charged with implementing the President's foreign policy must therefore provide an effective and efficient means for ensuring that officers and employees faithfully implement the President's policies. President Trump cannot address the proxy war until he first removes the people who were conducting it, hence the executive order. President Trump signed this executive order yesterday, the same day he had the telephone call with President Putin. That is over at theconservativetreehouse.com. Very interesting observations by Sundance. SarahACarter.com has the story So Much for Foreign Aid. USAID awarded $27 million to groups helping anti-police, anti-Israel protesters avoid jail in the United States. Another day, another revelation of exactly how the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has unethically spent tens of millions of dollars. Over $27 million in, quote, foreign aid was allocated to groups right here in the United States to support legal defense efforts for leftist protesters, reports Daily Caller. Their investigation found federal spending records show USAID awarded funds to the left-wing Tides Foundation, look them up, and Tides Center across several presidencies. Along with the State Department, USAID allocated the funds as early as 2014 to groups under the Tides label that help drive anti-police, anti-Israel activism. The purposes of the awards allegedly include humanitarian activities, supporting civil society organizations, and other projects both foreign and domestic, according to official descriptions. However, the government has paid the Tides Group 72% of the grants so far. So just what does the Tides Center promote? Well, the Daily Caller reports, among other philanthropic programs, the Tides Center and Tides Foundation fund left-leaning groups that provide attorney representation or other legal support for people accused of unlawful conduct at protests. In some cases, the sponsored groups have helped activists under federal investigation, meaning the U.S. government funded a movement trying to undermine its own law enforcement. The Tides Center is a fiscal sponsor for Palestine Legal, an organization giving legal defense and advice to anti-Israel activists facing repression from universities or law enforcement. A senior attorney at Palestine Legal told a leftist magazine in January that the group has represented or advised hundreds of students since the Israel-Hamas war began on October 7, 2023. TIDES-funded organizations also include the National Lawyers Guild and Center for Constitutional Rights, which directly assist anti-police protesters tied to the Black Lives Matter and Antifa movements. Daily Caller wrote, "The National Lawyers Guild gives legal representation to activists and sends legal observers to watch for alleged police misconduct against protesters. Some legal observers have gotten arrested along with them." The group boasted in 2021 that it provided training and education to thousands of organizers and attorneys, helped fight federal prosecution and grand jury investigations, and organized legal representation for around 20,000 arrestees throughout 2020. In July 2023, New York City agreed to pay $13 million to rioters who clashed with law enforcement to settle a National Lawyers Guild lawsuit. Center for Constitutional Rights similarly came to the defense of Antifa-linked rioters who allegedly lit fires and attacked law enforcement in Atlanta, Georgia in 2023 to protest the construction of a police facility they dubbed Cop City. As recently as August of 2023, the center wrote, "We are working closely with local and national partners to challenge law enforcement's labeling of activists protesting Cop City as terrorists and domestic violent extremists, and to provide resources and support to communities on the ground who are fighting to ensure that Cop City will never be built." The group has also lobbied authorities not to prosecute the Antifa agitators on domestic terrorism charges. The Tides Foundation. You know who they are. And guess what? Some money just got sucked out of their back pocket. Woohoo! Thought it would be interesting to point out this story over at judicialwatch.org this week. Court orders Trump Justice Department to declare whether it will continue Biden Justice Department's opposition to releasing Biden audio tapes from the special counsel interview. It's pretty rich. Judicial Watch announced today that a federal court ordered the U.S. Department of Justice to declare whether it intends to continue denying Judicial Watch's request for the full audio of former President Joe Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur. Judge Timothy J. Kelly of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia wrote, "In light of the recent change in administration, it is hereby ordered that defendant shall, by February 19, 2025, file a status report confirming that its position outlined in its motion for summary judgment and memorandum in opposition remains unchanged." Judicial Watch filed the first Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, that's FOIA, and is the lead plaintiff asking for the Biden audio recordings of his interviews in special counsel Hur's criminal investigation of Biden's theft and disclosure of classified records. This lawsuit has already forced the Biden administration to confess that the transcripts of the audio recordings have been altered and are not accurate. The then Biden Justice Department fought to keep the audio recordings secret and asked the court to ignore precedent and rewrite FOIA law. The former Biden agency demanded that a law enforcement executive privilege exemption be rewritten to help Joe Biden, wants to change FOIA law to protect after 50 years of being a politician, President Joe Biden's privacy in his voice, and sought to potentially end FOIA with a new argument that the possible AI alteration of the Hur recordings was reason to keep the recordings in any government record a secret from the public. We hope the Trump Justice Department accepts what seems like an invitation from a federal court to end the Biden regime's cover-up of Biden's apparent dementia, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said. Judicial Watch argues that the recordings should be released because an open question remains about whether special counsel Hur's conclusion that President Biden should not be prosecuted for his mishandling of classified records and is supported by the evidence. Further, the audio would educate the public about whether special counsel Hur appropriately pursued justice by recommending to the Attorney General that criminal charges should not be brought against Biden concerning his mishandling of classified materials. This question is of even more import these days because another special counsel, with approval by Attorney General Garland, is currently prosecuting President Trump for allegedly engaging in similar actions. In addition to President Trump being both President Biden's former political opponent and the current Republican nominee in the upcoming presidential election, President Trump is the only former president or vice president to be prosecuted for such actions. Judicial Watch also criticized the Biden Justice Department's reliance on a case that allowed the withholding of the audio of the dying cries of the Challenger astronauts as simply repugnant. On February 5th, 2024, Special Counsel Robert Hur issued the report of the Special Counsel on the investigation into unauthorized removal, retention, and disclosure of classified documents discovered at locations including the Penn Biden Center and the Delaware private residence of President Joseph R. Biden Jr. In the report, Hur called Biden a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory and declined to charge Biden with a serious felony. We have also considered that, at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Based on our direct interactions with and observations of him, he is someone for whom many jurors will want to identify reasonable doubt. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. Prior to the finalization of the report, the White House issued a letter to the special counsel's office attacking the report's treatment of President Biden's memory and added, "There is ample evidence from your interview that the president did well in answering your questions." The White House admitted to the court that the transcript of President Joe Biden's testimony to Special Counsel Robert Hur is not accurate and is missing filler words such as or and words that may have been repeated when spoken, such as I, and, which were sometimes only listed a single time in the transcripts. The Heritage Foundation and a CNN-led media coalition have been joined with Judicial Watch's lawsuit. Judicial Watch has several ongoing FOIA lawsuits about Biden's document scandals and the related unprecedented partisan prosecutorial and judicial abuses of former President Donald J. Trump. That's over at judicialwatch.org. Over at nypost.com, one of my favorite writers over there at the New York Post is Betsy McCaughey. She wrote, "Birthright citizenship is a noble idea, and the Supreme Court should help Trump end it." Get ready for a Supreme Court showdown over President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. The idea that all children born in the United States have the same rights regardless of when and how their parents arrived. Despite what many pundits and even lower court judges are saying, overturning Trump's order is not a slam dunk for the president's opponents. There are powerful arguments and Supreme Court precedents on both sides. And the 1888 case most often cited by Trump's opponents, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, actually supports the president's order. That case was 138 years ago. This year, on January 20th, Trump declared by executive order that babies born to illegal immigrant mothers and lacking a father who is a citizen or legal U.S. resident will no longer automatically receive U.S. citizenship. As of February 17th, hospitals would be barred from issuing U.S. birth certificates for these newborns, who number about 250,000 per year. Trump also took aim at birth tourism, ending automatic citizenship for the 30,000 babies born each year to women who enter the U.S. illegally on temporary visas expressly to give birth here. Some women wade across the Rio Grande, others fly first class, but both claim citizenship for their newborns under the Birthright Clause of the 14th Amendment. The clause was originally proposed to guarantee citizenship to children born to former slaves, but during its drafting in 1866, Congress expanded the principle to children of any race or ethnicity born within the boundaries of the United States. Congress did not debate whether the offspring of those in the country illegally were guaranteed citizenship because there was no such thing as illegal immigration at the time. Even the odious Chinese Exclusion Act wasn't passed until 1882, and the U.S. didn't put numerical limits on immigration until 1921. Yet Trump's executive order triggered lawsuits by 22 states, the city of San Francisco, and numerous nonprofits. Within days, federal judges were blocking its implementation. Judge John C. Coninger of the Western District of Washington State called it blatantly unconstitutional. Judge Deborah Boardman of Maryland claimed the Supreme Court has resoundingly rejected the president's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. These are overstatements. There is no predicting how the Supreme Court will rule. No justice has expressed a view on the question other than Samuel Alito, who stated during his confirmation hearing that birthright citizenship may turn out to be a complicated question. As for precedent, there's only one Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship in the last 160 years, the Wong Kim Ark case. In that case, the court ruled that the protections and guarantees afforded by the 14th Amendment belong to citizens and non-citizens alike, so long as they are permitted by the United States to reside here. That key phrase, the justice will have to determine whether illegal immigrants are permitted to live in the United States, an oxymoron. Justice Horace Gray, writing for the court in Wong Kim Ark, supported the decision by citing an earlier Supreme Court ruling, the 1886 case of Yick-Wo v. Hopkins, which said that the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause applied to people of all races who have the right to temporarily or permanently reside within the United States, not people here illegally. These cases do not back up Judge Boardman's flamboyant claim that the court has resoundingly rejected Trump's interpretation. Lacking precedent, the Supreme Court's conservative majority will likely look to founding principles. Birthright citizenship is a noble idea, to be sure. Its defenders warn that making children born to illegal immigrants ineligible would produce a subclass of people with fewer rights, threatening American principles of egalitarianism. But it's true. Its critics argue that its abuse makes a mockery of citizenship and turns taxpayers into saps. Nationwide, 60% of households headed by an illegal immigrant collect federal benefits like SNAP nutrition assistance and Medicaid, according to the Center for Immigration Studies. Often a U.S.-born child is the meal ticket making the household eligible. Illegal border crossings are down 90% since Trump took office, but executive orders are temporary, lasting only as long as the president remains in office. So however the court rules, Congress must act. Congress can limit household eligibility for federally funded benefits or impose time limits. That would alleviate the cost to taxpayers and, just as importantly, would reduce incentives to enter the country illegally. Otherwise, open borders and extravagant welfare systems will deplete this nation under a future president with or without birthright citizenship. And then that is over at nypost.com. Well, that wraps up our tour of the news of the week for another episode. Hope you'll tune in again next week for another episode of Atomic Biscuits. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.